Today's video is all about the long run. The long run or your endurance run is a staple of any run training program, from 5Ks all the way up to ultramarathons, and obviously vary greatly depending on the event that you're training for. But knowing how far you should be doing and how to implement them is key. So starting off, by the long run or endurance runs, as they're also sometimes known, I'm talking about those long runs where you're probably in an effort zone of around 5 to 6 in terms of perceived exertion, and that will vary depending on going uphill and downhill, but ultimately it's in a very kind of easy pace for you, and they would be anywhere between typically 1 hour upwards. So even if you're doing a 5K, you would still be doing potentially long runs, although it may be short for an ultramarathon, but a 1 hour long run, for example. Every training plan will likely include a longer, easy run within that, and understanding what percentage of time that should take up in a training plan. There's so many different opinions. If you take Jack Daniels, an esteemed running coach, he said around 20 to 25%. So if you're doing 40 miles a week, that could be 10 miles. But there's other opinions as well, that it should be a larger percentage or even a lower percentage. I've seen some stats where you say typically in marathon plans it'll be anywhere between 18 to around 20 miles would be the longest long run that you do. However, other training plans will have it 25 miles. It could be 3 hours, depending on how it's measured. So first off, looking at the measurements. Personally, I do it by time rather than distance, because most of my running is off-road. So if I'm talking about doing, say, a 100-kilometre ultramarathon, then that time can vary greatly, whether it's mountainous or whether it's on flat, on a running track, very easy running. So therefore, saying that I have to do X distance maybe isn't representative of the training for the race. So as a percentage of total race distance, I don't tend to use that as a metric. I look more at time rather than physical distance. Now, the other key point here is that in terms of total long run distance, I think there is a general rule of thumb that the longer the race you're training for, the smaller the percentage of the total race distance you will do as part of your long run. So what do I mean by that? Well, essentially, if you're training for a 5-kilometre race, your long run is likely to be longer than the race distance itself. Up to 10k, you again may be going longer or equal to that distance. By the time you get into half marathon training, then you may be doing slightly less or around the same distance as the race. And then, as I mentioned, for marathons, you'll probably be in the region of around 3 hours, 20 miles, 32 kilometres, depending on what you choose to measure. That's what most training plans would have. By the time you then take that up to an ultramarathon distance, if you're doing a 50-mile race, you're probably not going to be doing in the region of a 40-mile long run as a training run. And if you go up to, say, 100 miles, you're not likely to be doing, say, 80 miles as a training run. You can see that as a percentage of, say, a marathon. If you're doing 20, 21 miles as your longest run out of 26, that's quite a large percentage still. But if you're doing 100 miles, you're not going to be doing that same percentage. You're not going to be doing those 70, 80 mile long runs as part of that training, because the body would just take far too long to recover from that. So as a general rule of thumb, the longer the race that you're doing, the smaller the percentage of the total race distance that your long run would be. There are so many different variables as well to consider when you're doing a long run, such as your base fitness that you're starting from. Is it your first marathon, or have you done multiple marathons in the past, for example? So if you're taking that, your first one, you'll probably have a progressive one. General rule of thumb again, you hear is around 10% increase week on week. It's quite a safe way of doing that, and then you'd have a recovery week built into that. But you'd be building up slowly, week on week, your long run distance. However, if you're a very experienced runner with many years and lots of base miles in the bank, then you can probably get away with doing a longer long run. The other key element, as I mentioned, is around the terrain and the sort of race that you're doing. And that's why I focus more on time rather than distance, because I think it's far more representative. If I'm training for an ultramarathon or a mountain marathon, it's going to be extremely different in terms of the terrain that I'm training on, and also the distances that I'll be doing in that time. So to give you an example, if I was doing a road marathon versus a mountain marathon with say 4,500 meters of ascent on technical terrain, my long run for the mountain marathon may be in the region of around 6 to 7 hours, because I know the race will be taking significantly longer, maybe up to 10, 12 hours. I'm thinking something like the Glencoe Skyline, versus a road marathon where my long run may be in the region of around 2.5 to 3 hours maximum if it's a relatively flat road marathon that I'm training for. So you can see there's a vast difference there. Even though the race distance will be the same, the terrain will have an impact on it. I think one of the key things for your long run to maximise the benefit of them is first off making sure that you go at the right intensity. So those who follow the channel will know that I use a heart rate zone for running based on Joe Friel's model, and endurance is around zone 2 of that. But it's a perceived effort of around 5 to 6, conversational pace. You should be able to easily say full sentences without any issue in terms of that intensity to give you a gauge. One of the other features to ensure that you're maximising the benefit of your long run is to replicate the race conditions for that long run. If you're training for a road marathon, as you get closer to the race and likely the long runs are getting longer, I would then convert from trails onto roads to get the body used to running on roads, and it gives you an indication of what your road running pace is. If you're doing a mountain ultramarathon, then towards the end, the tail end, as your training becomes more specific, then I think you really need to get on the trails into mountainous terrain and practice on that. So your distance may be relatively short, but you're getting more reflective training and more specific training for that racing environment. And I think that's one of the key features of long runs for me personally, is making them specific to the race that you're doing. A crucial element of long runs is around fueling, so your hydration and what you're eating. And again, for the shorter distances, not as important, 5k, 10k, you can get away without having to eat or drink, most likely. However, once you start going a bit longer, then you're going to start looking, depending on how long you're taking, for a half marathon and a marathon definitely, and into the ultramarathon distance, about fueling. And I use my long runs very much for practicing and rehearsing what I'm going to do on race day. So the food, and by that I mean exactly the same brand, the same products that I will be taking on that long run, and also my hydration strategy. So how frequently do I drink? Being quite experienced now at this, I've got a strategy that works, but it varies depending on the temperature, how frequently I drink, every 10 to every 15 minutes, and how often I eat. But not just that, what's in the bottle, so an electrolyte drink, plain water, and that's something which the long runs are so beneficial for as well. So it's not just about getting the time on your feet and getting the distance in, but it's also about practicing what you're going to have on race day. Another element as well is practice wearing what you're going to wear on race day. You may have a pair of shoes that you wear for your midweek high intensity efforts and you feel absolutely fantastic. However, when you do a 2.5, 3 hour long run, you may find that you get some chafing, some blisters, and they wouldn't be suitable for the race themselves. So again, use the long runs as rehearsal for race day. That could even be to the point that you start at the same time that you're going to do on the race day. The meal before, so say typically long runs will be at the weekend, so on the Friday night, what are you going to have before the race, if your race is on a Saturday, and then do that before your long run so you can get practice and see how it sits in your stomach. And it's just about rehearsing that, and that's one of the other major benefits of doing long runs. Not just about getting out and running long distances and building up that aerobic base, but actually treating it as a dress rehearsal for race day. And once you start doing things like ultramarathons with mandatory kit, that just becomes even more important, because you have to practice carrying the kit, how will it feel, how will you pack it. To give a clear indication of how long your long run should be, or a set formula, that's not practical, and unfortunately it's not something I'm able to do. If you picked up say 5 different run coaching books by 5 well-known run coaches, they'll all have different ideas and different opinions about what is best. There are so many different variables, as I mentioned, the athlete and the race being 2 of the biggest ones, but one of the key elements I always focus on, as I said, is time. So I don't stick to distance, I look at time, and for my mountain training I look at elevation. So for the long run that I did recently, I was aiming for around 10 hours and around 3,500 meters of ascent. In total, I did 3,600 odd meters of ascent in about 10 hours and 15 minutes. Run done. This is what I look like after 59.6 kilometers.
in the mountains.
That was the longest long run that I've done. In total, that may be a quarter of my race time. So you can see for a 100-mile race like UTMB in the mountains, that kind of duration, I did maybe a quarter. However, I knew if I went and did half or 3/4 of the time that I think I may do at the race, then I would have been out for over a day, and my recovery would have been absolutely massive as a result of that, and I would have missed probably a whole training week as a result. So it's about looking at where you're starting from, your base fitness, looking at the race and the terrain that the race is going to be, working out how long you think it's going to be, and then ensuring that however long you're running is in a progressive manner, so you're slowly building up your long runs till you get to a point where you're happy and you're achieving a realistic long run that's going to be beneficial. There is one element I will also add just at the end, is that if you are doing marathons or shorter distances, then there is definitely a benefit, especially if you're looking to do a fast time, of adding in, say, a steady state run or a couple of steady state run intervals into the middle of your long run. I did do a video on steady state runs, I'll put a link to that up there. But ultimately, these are faster than your forever pace, faster than your race pace probably will be, but they're not going above lactate thresholds, so they're not flat out sprints, and in the region of around 20 to 30 minutes. So if you were doing a long run for a marathon of say 3 hours, what you could do as part of that is an hour's warm up at your endurance pace, that 5 to 6 perceived exertion level, and then do 2 by 30-minute steady state runs with a 5-10 minute recovery period in the middle, and then finish off that 3-hour run back down at your endurance pace, that conversational pace. And that would help really get you used to running faster. It's also great for dealing with fueling. Hope you found this video useful. If you have, please make sure you give it a like and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss out on any future content. If you'd like to sign up to my weekly newsletter with top training advice, there's a link to my website down below where you can find the form to sign up. Also, make sure you follow TMR Coaching across the various social medias, Twitter, Instagram and Facebook. Again, there's links down below. I'll see you next time.